All right, everybody. Welcome into another episode of Around the Octagon. Right around the corner, we have UFC 311 stacked card. I am accompanied by Luke, Ryan, and a first-timer. We have Son here. I'm excited to get into this card and talk some fights with you guys.
Yes, sir. Let's do it.
But first off, we will start with a little bit of a question. We caught a little bit of heat on social media about one of our clips talking about the Gaethje Max Holloway knockout, talking about how it might be the best clip or the best knockout of all time. So, Ryan, I'll give you the chance here to redeem yourself. You caught a little bit of heat. Do you take back what you said about that potentially being the best knockout of all time? And if you do, what are you going with?
I don't know if I should take it back, but I'd say it's definitely up there. I'm thinking from the time I started watching UFC, which is probably around like 2018, 2019, that's easily one of, if not the best knockout I've ever seen personally. Going back history-wise, I could give you most spectacular Joaquin Buckley over Casanega Basagwe, like the little jumping 360 with his foot held. That's up there for me. Leon Edwards, round 5 against Usman on a 14 winning streak with 50 seconds left. Head kick KO in Salt Lake City. That's up there. A couple more head kicks. Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, head kick KO in Salt Lake City. That's up there. But I think when you look at the 4 that I listed, if not Joaquin Buckley, maybe Leon Edwards, that still tops the list, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think there's 2 ways this argument can really go. You can be like, okay, which one had the most meaning as far as a knockout goes? And then it's like, okay, it's Leon, KOing Usman, pound for pound, headshot, dead. Or you can go, which was the coolest and which one had like the most aura around it. And if you're going that route, I don't see a problem with the Holloway knockout being number 1 if you're not going like Joaquin Buckley with that spinning back heel kick. But yeah, I had no problem with it either. I don't know if either of you guys have something you want to add to that one, but I really think that's the argument.
Yeah, I think
I think if you're looking outside of the UFC, even I think probably the best knockout I've ever seen, and this is I got 2 of them coming, but I think one of the best that I've ever seen is Anderson Silva versus Forrest Griffin back in the day. Anderson knocks him down and essentially gives his hand out so he can pick him back up. Gives Forrest Griffin the time to get up, and then Forrest Griffin kind of bull rushes him with a flurry of punches, and Anderson just beautifully. I mean, if you slow that thing down, it's like watching poetry in motion. He just weaves out of the way of every single punch. He's showing really like the expertise that he has just in striking, the distance control that he had there, and with one punch, he just knocks him out, flatlines him. So. If we're talking about best knockouts of all time, I think that's definitely up there, easily a top 3. And if not that one, I think probably the best thing I've ever watched in my life is Demetrius Johnson versus Moraes in one where, that's another one where you slow that thing down and it's like watching poetry in motion. I mean, he punches him, knocks him back, and then catches him in stride with the flying knee. I don't think it gets better than that, technically speaking, and just the looks of it. It was a beauty.
Yeah, that's the first one that comes to mind. Overall, MMA is the Mighty Mouse knockout. I mean, you open any MMA account on Instagram, that's like definitely one of their pinned posts. It's like all time. We still see it all the time, but I agree with Ryan. I don't think it's crazy taken. I think a lot of other guys, like I know Joe Rogan said it. Obviously, he was interviewing Max Holloway on his podcast where he was like, that's the greatest knockout of all time. But I think just like the BMF belt and it being the last second really puts it up there too. But I don't think it's too hot of a take, Rye. I'll defend you there.
I agree that.
Yeah, I can't. I can't shoot that down either. That's definitely easily to be put up as one of the best, if not the best.
The only one we didn't mention that maybe should have gotten its flowers could have been Conor KO and Aldo as well. I mean, you could probably throw that up on that list, especially just given how many times that thing's been shared around. So I'll throw in Conor KO and Aldo, and also just that whole moment. They literally paraded him around the whole build up to that fight just for that like 14-second knockout. So I'll throw Conor in the honorable mention since it seems like he needs to get his name announced a little bit more recently.
It's it's just like it's a completely subjective topic. I mean, you bringing up Forrest Griffin, Anderson Silva, like reminds me too, just going back. Donald Cerrone's 4-piece combo head kick.
Yeah.
That knockout's sick. You slow that down, awesome combination for a KO. There's so many to choose from at the end of the day. So.
Yeah, definitely. All right, let's get into some fight news. It just got rumored that Volk and Ilia are targeted for UFC 314. I don't know about you guys. I'm personally not the most excited for this rematch. Does anyone here really see like a path for victory for Volk, or thinks he has a legitimate shot to reclaim his throne?
Yeah, I'll kick this off. I don't, based off the last fights and how good Ilia has gotten, and especially, there's that long-standing aspect that once you become the champion, your confidence grows that much more and you become that much better because you hold the belt and you're that much more expert, gets that much more experience. But I will say Volk's a professional. He's one of the goats of the sport. He's taken a lot of time off. He's studied game. He's definitely in the gym getting better. So, you can't count Volk out. I think the odds when they come out, they'll be heavily favored in Ilia's favor. But I don't know, man. You can't count Volk out. I'm not counting him out yet.
I agree. I mean, you can never really count out Volk, but I think Topuria's got the two big advantages on Volk. He's got the peak. He's in peak physical shape. I mean, he's younger, he's faster. As much as I hate to say it, physically speaking, Topuria is in a different planet compared to Volk, especially after the amount of knockouts and just the ways that Volk's been getting finished the past few fights. Even going back to Islam. It has not looked good for Volk's body. Not only that, but Topuria's never lost a fight. I mean, the guy is undefeated. And, usually these nerves of losing that 0 would pretty much peak at, the championship fight that he did have with Volk. And he got through that, unscathed in a very, very impressive fashion. So I really have a very, very tough time seeing Ilia lose this fight, unless Volk, they say you can't teach a dog old tricks, but if there's an old dog that I can teach old tricks to and that I trust to learn new tricks, it'd be Volk. So, again, yeah, I definitely agree. You can never count him out, but I think, the odds are rightfully going to be heavily favored for Ilia to take that fight.
Yeah, as do I. I mean, unless Volk comes in with some crazy new game plan, different style, I really don't see him taking this one away from Ilia. It's not like you said, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Volk, maybe, but it would take a significant camp and a significant game plan, in my opinion, for Volk to take that one off of Ilia. And I think to do that, it would have to go 5 rounds and he'd have to squeak out a decision. With a power puncher like Ilia, giving 25 minutes to have him try to find your chin is just nearly impossible for him not to do. So I think we might be on the verge of another KO for Ilia here.
Yeah, I think there's another opportunity for Ilia to rack up another title defense that obviously will be well respected. But I am happy that this is targeted for 314 because at the end of the day, it just keeps the division moving. Because 314 will fall in May. And if Volk were not to get the title shot, you would think he'd be fighting in a title eliminator against Diego or I don't know why I'm blanking on the other dude's name, but you believe it'd probably be Mosvar. You think it'd probably be a title eliminator, and then Ilia wouldn't fight for another 3 months after that. So then, bringing me to my next point, the title eliminator will be Diego Lopez versus Yair Rodriguez, which they are heading Mexico City on March 29th. This is a fun fight. Ryan, we'll kick it off with you. I know you're going to be backing your boy Diego here. How do you see that fight going?
I do have Diego winning that one. Long layoff for Yair. Always competitive, always dangerous on the feet. What he does lack, though, is a competent ground game. When he gets in there with high-level grapplers, you saw with Ortega, he can get submitted, and Diego is one of the best in that division when it comes to grappling and being on the ground. So I could see Diego putting him out by sub, maybe KO ground and pound, TKO ground and pound. And then in terms of, I don't necessarily think that if Yair were to get the win, I think he'd have to fight at least one more time before going up for the belt. I mean, lost to Brian Ortega in his last bout. It would really shake up the division. I don't know whether you book him you give Movzar the title fight, book him against, I don't even know who you would fight in terms of rising prospects, but I'd like to see Yair fight one more time if he were to get that win before going to face Ilia for the belt.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. I don't see Diego losing this fight, and I also don't see him losing anytime soon. I think out of everybody in that division, I mean, him and Movsar obviously is a very tough and close fight to call. But I think Diego's going to put up the biggest threat even against Ilia. He's super young, super hungry. Especially, you know, I always think back on his debut. He probably has the most impressive, to me, that I've seen debut in the UFC. I mean, that fight with Movsar, he arguably, and in my opinion, he did win that fight, especially with the threats that he posed. That fight, he had almost 2-3 submissions, and he was very close. One time, I'm pretty sure he was saved by the bell. So, I don't see him losing. I mean, MMA math never actually works, but just the way that he took out Brian Ortega, it was super impressive. Brian Ortega, like he came off a very, very long rest period, came back, got the win, and then obviously met up with Diego Lopez, and that was, you know, he was in deep water. And I think that's where Diego is going to pull Yair again. Probably I'm taking him by sub this time. He'll probably try and knock him out, figure that he can't just because of the length, and then he'll put him out with his sub.
Yeah, I think you guys really hit everything. I think overall, just kind of, I wouldn't say disappointed because, like we talked about, you kind of earned with the GOAT or one of the GOATs of the division with Volk getting that rematch. But at the same time, I think that's all the fight we're looking forward to is Diego versus Ilia. So I think this is just another stepping stone. I agree with you guys. I would favor sub as well. We'll see when the odds come out what that's going to be like. It probably is not plus money for the sub there. But also, like, is Yair only fighting in Mexico? This is back-to-back fights in Mexico City, right?
Yeah.
I think Ortega was Mexico City as well.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I was a huge fan of Yair earlier, especially his fight against Holloway. That was a great fight, but I think he's kind of, you know, maybe the age is catching up to him a little bit. Like you guys said, when you're at this stage and you don't have the ground game that your opponents do, you just can't fight at the championship level. And I think that's kind of what we see with Yair's career path at this point.
Yeah, I'm right with all you guys on this one. I don't think any of us are veering away from Diego, and I just don't necessarily really see where Yair would beat Diego. Diego is so sharp on his feet too. Ground game's super sharp. So I think Diego gets him out of there. And that is exactly what the UFC wants. Just leading up into that title fight, they want Diego to win. They know everyone wants to see that Diego versus Ilia fight. So yeah, I'm riding with Diego too. Next up, it has been rumored that Dan Hooker versus Jesus Christ, that Dan Hooker versus Justin Gaethje is rumored for UFC 313 on March 8th. That going into it could be, you know, like the fight of the year going into it. That's going to be an absolute banger. Luke, we'll kick it off with you. Do you think Dan Hooker can ride his momentum against Gaethje in this one and get the job done?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of both guys. I think they're both super entertaining. It's kind of hard to see Dan Hooker kind of rejuvenate his career here. But I think he runs into a wall with Gaethje. I think there was a point in time where Gaethje was just taking a little bit too much fights. And he's getting older. And he said, like, you know, I'm going to die in the ring. But he is getting there. If he doesn't keep on winning and still be in title contention, he's probably going to hang him up. But I think he gets this one done. He's taking a lot of time off. I trust his coaching. With Trevor and those guys. So I think Dan Hooker is a huge test here, but I think Gaethje comes out with the victory. I think he finishes him here. I think he breaks the Dan Hooker, you know, invincible spell that he's been on recently.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to have to look into this one a little more. I feel like right now, for me, that's almost like a coin flip just because I like the long layoff that Gaethje took off, you know, almost a year. Probably it'll be 11 months since he fought Holloway, taking that vicious KO. I like to see guys take time off after they get knocked out like that. But at the same time, it's Dan Hooker's currently riding all the momentum in the world. So, you know, it's a tough one to say.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see Gaethje taking that fight. I think Dan Hooker obviously was at the top of his game his last fight. But again, I'm afraid it could be one of those one-off things where, you know, he pulled a Garbrandt, you know, the best fighter for 25 minutes. And then everything after that kind of went downhill. I mean, Dan Hooker's injuries are nothing to play with. I mean, they're very serious, you know, and those repaired, you know, body parts are only going to be good for so long. And if there's one guy that can, you know, really break down his opponent, it's going to be Gaethje. And I don't see Gaethje losing that fight unless the same Dan Hooker that came in last time comes in again. What I am excited about this fight though is especially if Moicano gets the win this weekend, that is probably going to be the opponent is either Dan Hooker or Justin Gaethje. Moicano's been calling for Dan Hooker for a while now. He's got some sort of beef with him. I think it's fucking hilarious. But that's probably the fight that I'm more excited about. I wish the Dan Hooker hype train could keep going for as long as possible. And obviously Justin Gaethje is just an amazing fighter to watch all the time. But I think I'm more excited to the fight that precedes that one.
Well, son, I will say, if you're rooting for the hype train to stay alive a little bit longer, I'm going to say some encouraging words. I got the Hangman in this one. I know it's a little ways out, but I just love the momentum that Dan Hooker's had recently. And every time I listen to that guy, I'm just like, this guy's a baller. Just how violent of a person he is. And people call Justin Gaethje the most violent man in the UFC. I don't think you necessarily can take that away from Dan Hooker. And also, I just don't know how Justin Gaethje is going to look. I don't know what it does to your psyche after getting knocked out completely cold like that. Like, that's no TKO stoppage. That was flatlined out cold. I'm hoping that long layoff he can come back and look like the same Justin Gaethje, but I wouldn't put my money on it, especially at his age. So I do think Hooker can ride the momentum in this one.
Yeah. Before we move on, I just want to state, I think that this kind of guarantees a Dustin Poirier, Max Holloway rematch here for the BMF belt. I think this will be Poirier's last fight, but I was thinking maybe they would give Holloway Hooker for the BMF belt, but seeing that that's out of the question with this fight, I want to hear your guys' opinion, but I think that's what's next for both of those guys.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Everyone else is booked as far as who both Poirier and Holloway would fight. I mean, because you'd think it'd be one of all of those guys for each other, so it only makes sense. The math adds. Yeah,
I couldn't give you a guess on who Dustin Poirier is fighting next. I know he's been calling a bunch of people out. He stated a bunch of times that this is his retirement fight. You never know. He could pull a Tony Ferguson and forget that he's retiring, but I could not put my finger down on who he's going to fight. Even if it is Max Holloway, that would I'd kind of be blindsided by that news. It's really up in the air for me. Unless McGregor unretires and gets off the stuff, I don't see there being a clear next opponent for Dustin Poirier.
Yeah, I guess it makes the most sense as I don't even know if you'd call that Max's introduction to the lightweight division, but I guess we were seriously going to go compete for a title. Poirier's still up there in the rankings. I think he's number 3 or number 4. So maybe even number 2. I mean, a win over Poirier pretty much boosts Max in the title shot contention. So in terms of aspects of career and belt chasing, this fight makes sense for Max. And if you can put up a 25-minute championship fight to go with it for the BMF belt, it'll sell. So,
yeah. All right. On to the last bit of fight news. Leon versus JDM is targeted for UFC London. I believe that's at the end of March. So it looks like JDM's path to the title becomes a lot more clear if you were to take this fight with Leon. San, we'll kick it off with you here. You have any viewpoint on this JDM-Leon fight that's targeted for a few months out?
Yeah, it's a tough one to call. I mean, they both bring very different skill sets. I mean, when you got a guy like JDM that can pretty much do it all, and then a guy like Leon who, he's in his last few fights, he's had good takedown defense and things like that. But, when I think Leon Edwards, I think mainly striking. Just watching JDM's last few fights, I think it's tough to root against him. I think it's tough to call the fight against him. His last 2 fights have been super impressive in my opinion. And I think he's just going to keep that train rolling. There's going to be a big jump up in competition for him. Obviously, Leon Edwards is champion material. He's still one of the baddest men walking the planet. He's always going to pose a threat, as we saw in that title fight with Kamaru Usman. That's literally a guy that you can never, count out. That's, we've mentioned it before today. There's a bunch of guys you can't count out, but Leon Edwards is a guy that, he can really pull it out from the dirt. So, obviously cannot count him out by any means necessary, but I really don't think JDM's going to lose this fight. He's just looked so good recently.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. JDM's once again another guy riding all the momentum in the world. Only thing is going into enemy territory, always sketchy. Fighting Leon in his home crowd in London, it's a hard hill to climb. But if anyone can climb it, I think it's JDM.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'm with you guys as well. I think I kind of felt like Leon was holding a lot back in the Belal fight. Obviously, Belal eliminated a lot of Leon's, strengths in that fight. But I feel like this is kind of a perfect fight after a decent layoff to get back in there and kind of being a good fight for, his skill set, like you said. Both pretty good strikers. JDM obviously I think has more of the takedown aggressiveness and ability on the ground. But like you said, the Leon's takedown defense has looked great, in his Usman fights and pretty good in his Belal fight. So I think this is one I need more time, once it gets closer, hear stuff about the camps and how everything's going injuries wise and stuff. That'll be a better judge. But right now it's a coin flip for me.
Yeah. All right, and then we have a little bit of news in the boxing world. Canelo Alvarez versus Terrence Crawford is finally agreed upon. That will be hosted in Vegas for September. Also, Devin Haney versus Ryan Garcia 2 is also in the works after Devin Haney agreed to drop his lawsuits. So looks like they'll figure something out there, and we can see the rematch, and Ryan Garcia can put that one to bed. And lastly, in the boxing news, Tyson Fury, one of the heavyweight greats, just announced he is retiring from the sport. So that's pretty big news as well. But let's hop into this card. To start us off, we have Tiger Ulanbekov at -360 versus Clayton Carpenter at +270. The Team Khabib is starting off this busy night right away, opening up the card with Tiger. Luke, we'll kick it off with you. Do you think the prospect in Clayton Carpenter can get this one done against Tiger Ulanbekov?
I do not think he gets it done. I think this kicks off the first of many wins for the Russians on this card. I got Tagir here. I think it's just more of an advantage, a little bit more experience in the UFC. I think he's 2-2 in his last 4, but he has some pretty decent opponents that he's fought in. Oh, yeah. 3-2 in his last 5, but he has beaten Cody Durden, lost his last fight, and I just think these guys are ready. I think they're going to sweep this card. I don't know too much about Clayton Carpenter. I haven't seen him fight. But he does, sport an 8-0 record, so there's always that coming in. But I just think that this is the start of the Russians' reign for this fight, so I got Tagir here.
Luke, as do I. Clayton Carpenter, last 2 wins via sub. Guy that likes to get it to the ground. Only problem is when you face guys out of Team Khabib's camp, that almost entirely gets neutralized to the point where you have no idea what you're doing. And I see Tagir just being able to stuff takedowns, keep it off the ground, and then just use veteranship to sneak his way to a unanimous decision.
Yeah, I kind of got a hot take for you guys. I think Clayton Carpenter takes this one. He's still undefeated. He's 8-0. He's a really good prospect coming in the UFC. And I honestly think he's underrated. He's one of the top rated flyweights in the United States and outside of that, even in the world. Obviously it's tough to put a finger on what the rankings are outside of the US, but within the United States, he's very highly ranked, super good. His notable wins recently, his last one was Lucas Hosha, who was a great fighter, not bad by any means necessary or by any means. And then Edgar Chairez back in 2022, that was pretty notable too. He's currently in the UFC. These are guys that, you recognize the name. And not only that, but, this might not go as far as I'd like it to, but Steve Erceg was supposed to fight him back in 2023. So that just kind of shows you the caliber that we're working with. He's not a bum. He's not, he's more unknown. He's definitely underrated in my opinion. And, but that, just being matched up with Steve Erceg, he's been on a crazy run recently. But back in 2023, that's really when he started to pick things up. So that kind of shows you, the matchmakers saw it. I see it as well. This guy is legit. And if anybody's going to hand Tagir another L, it's going to be Clayton. Especially on this fight, very early prelims. These guys are hungry. These guys want to fight, especially since, this is, his first fight in the UFC or first or second fight in the UFC for Clayton. Maybe official UFC card. This is his first fight. So, he needs this. And, that Khabib nameplate only goes so far in my book. That's a big gym. He's not, I think Khabib's main focus is his top guys. Like you got Umar, you got Islam, and then obviously any visitors that are coming out. So, I wouldn't say that he's a personal trainer by any means for Tagir. So I wouldn't call him untouchable, especially having, those 2 losses in the last 5 fights. I definitely see Clayton taking this one.
Yeah, I'm on Tagir. I'm drinking the Khabib Kool-Aid, and I'm proud of it. I'm actually going to parlay all 3 of Khabib's guys, and it's going to make me money at the end of the night. Circling back to your point on him not being Khabib's personal trainer and whatnot, let me just put this out there right now. Khabib does not go in everyone's corner, and he will be in Tagir's corner. So I think that does speak a little bit on what he thinks of Tagir. And Clayton Carpenter, here's the thing. I do not see Clayton Carpenter being able to wrestle Tagir. What do they do in Khabib's gym? They just sit there and they wrestle until you can swim on the floor. I mean, we've seen like the videos of Khabib's gym. It's ridiculous. And going on with that, Tagir trains with absolute killers. He has killers all around him. So, I mean, you're only as good as your competition in the training room. And I think Tagir has that absolutely everywhere, where Clayton Carpenter isn't necessarily afforded the opportunity to have something like that himself, especially when like Tagir has a guy fighting for the belt at the weight class right above him, who I bet you he trains with a pretty decent amount. So I think just that overall experience in the gym is going to hold a little bit too heavy for the prospect in Carpenter, but that should be a fun one to kick off the card.
Yeah, that's my hot take for the night.
Next, we will move on to Ricky Turcios. It's at plus 280 against Bernardo Sopaj at minus 380. Ryan, I'll start this one off with you. Do you think the young Sopaj can rebound following that brutal knockout loss in his last match to Vinicius Oliveira?
I do. I mean, if you look back at that fight with Vinicius Oliveira, you pretty much only see the knockout, which is only one side of the story. And before that, I would argue he was up 2 rounds to nothing. He was controlling Vinicius Oliveira on the ground. I think he took that fight on short notice. Eventually, with that short notice, he got tired up coming to the third. His takedowns were less effective. And then Vinicius Oliveira coming out with full Campbell just put in work on the feet and eventually beat him up and find that. For him, was unfortunately a highlight KO. So still a very game fighter. A lot more to prove in the UFC, in my opinion. Ricky Turcios, not a big fan of the dude. Lost to Raul Rosas in his last fight. Didn't look great. Kind of just came out there like he didn't have a care in the world. Was just openly, mocking Rojas in the cage, and then eventually got taken down and subbed. I see a clear advantage for Sopaj, at least on the ground speaking.
Yeah, Ryan, I'm right with you. I think the biggest thing is I just don't find Ricky that entertaining of a fighter. Most of his fights go to decision. Like you said, he got choked out by Raul Rojas in a kind of a dominant fashion. Obviously, Raul is one of the top prospects in the UFC, but we did see him lose the fight prior, I believe, or maybe 2 fights prior to a vet who was just able to, out stamina him. I don't think Ricky poses any path to victory here. I think you guys kind of hit it, or Ryan, you hit it on the head with Sopaj. That last fight, he was up 2 rounds to nothing, and was pretty impressive in that fight for the first 2 rounds. Everyone could get caught. He got caught at the end. I think it was like with 10 seconds left in that fight or 20 seconds left. So I'm on Sopaj here. I think the odds are correctly aligned here, and I think I'm playing the favorite.
Yeah, I don't think there's much else to say after you guys, honestly. Ricky's really been very unimpressive recently. 2 straight losses, I think. And, this is really a make or break fight for him. And I think it's break. You hate to see a guy like that lose. He's got one of the best personalities in the UFC. He's a very personal guy. He's super chill if you've seen him on the mic. But unfortunately, that doesn't translate into fight wins. That's how I agree with you guys. I see Sopaj taking this one. A knockout like that, it's kind of like a freak moment. In any moment, in any fight, you can see a knockout. So, I wouldn't put that against Sopaj too much, especially, with him being, up those 2 rounds and keeping up. He got caught in the 4th round and very late in it too. So, definitely Sopaj.
Yeah, the only thing I will add is like Ricky Tercios is not a knockout guy, so that does give Sopaj, a little bit more freedom to not necessarily be worrying about that knockout after experiencing a pretty bad knockout. So I think they're putting the young 24-year-old in a good position to get in the win column here and kind of start up his career in the UFC. Next up, we have Rinya Nakamura at -600 versus Moon Gaforov at +400. Nakamura was on the road to UFC alum, heavy favorite. Ryan, I know you like your Japanese fighters, so we'll start with you again here. Do you see Nakamura having some more success and continuing on that undefeated path?
I do. I just don't think it's going to be in the fashion that we normally see. I mean, his last fight, he fought a guy who only really just wanted to pull guard and lay on his back. So very, very boring decision. Rinya Nakamura, slick wrestling. I see this fight going in the same pattern where it's just maybe 1 to 2 minutes of stand up on the feet. Eventually, Rinya Nakamura will find a takedown and will just hold his opponent there and drown him and probably just lead to a UD, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you here. I mean, he's had, his last fight was back in February last year. He's had a lot of time to rest, and I don't think he has trouble putting this one away. Yeah, I could definitely see a decision here, but his opponent's definitely unimpressive in my eyes. But it's MMA, it's UFC. You never know what could happen. But in my opinion, I think Reinier takes this one.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. I don't think Gaforov has really any substantial, attacks here that Nakamura could really, I don't think there's anything he presents that he can't handle. So I got Nakamura here. I just think it's cool. We don't really see a lot of Japanese guys come up and have like the wrestling background. So I think that's something to look out for. And like you guys said before, with Clayton Carpenter, the undefeated streak, you kind of ride that. The guy's riding on a lot of confidence. A couple fights in the UFC, starting getting his footing. So I have him here. I think the odds are, again, correctly aligned here.
Yeah, I'm with everything you guys just said. I think at the end of the day, Nakamura's wrestling will be able to trump Gaforov's jiu-jitsu. I think that's something that has been proven pretty often in the past. When you get those wrestlers who understand body control and just don't put themselves in dangerous positions, they'll be able to avoid a lot of submission attempts and whatnot. So I see Nakamura controlling him. I'm also going with a UD win here. I don't think he gets him out of there. But all right, let's move on to the next fight. The next fight, we have Carol Rosa at -275 versus Aline Perez at +225. Rosa is 18-6 while being 7-3 in the UFC, opposed to Perez, who is 11-2 while being 4-1 in the UFC. I know Perez has made a bit of a name for herself, especially on social media with all the twerking and whatnot, and definitely has a lot of momentum on a 4-fight win streak. Sam, we'll kick it off with you. Do you think Perez can continue her momentum and pick up a win here?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know much about this fight. I do know that there's a -1,000 chance that that's going to be my bathroom break. Maybe put a bit of popcorn in the microwave, take a little break, maybe crack open a few beers. But no, in all seriousness, I actually do think she can take that hype train into the win column. She, was a 4-fight win streak, 5-fight win streak. She's looking really good. The crowd's with her. She's got a lot of, momentum outside of the octagon as well as inside the octagon. And her opponent's not unbeatable. She's lost not too long ago too. So, I think she can get it done. And, especially in those early prelim cards, I really don't think there's unless it's a very, very new prospect, you usually don't get too much of a difference in skill. So, I think the +200 and up underdog there is kind of unfair for Aline's corner there. So I definitely think she can get that upset.
Yeah, I agree with you here. Doing some research today and yesterday and during the week, a lot of people were saying Perez is riding the hot streak, but she's going to hit a wall when you jump that competition. And I took that into account. But at the same time, if you look at Rosa's record, she has fought the better the competition, higher ranked people in that weight class. But at the same time, she loses to just about all of them. So I think that also speaks a good portion into this fight. But like you guys said, I think when you ride that momentum, you're on the fight streak, your name is becoming outside of just UFC. People are know your name. Now you're ranked. You get an opportunity to jump the ranks and potentially fight for a belt. that adds, to your confidence. That adds to the, the weight of each fight. And I agree. I think this line is disparaged. I think it should be way closer to a pick'em fight. I think there's a lot of value in the plus 200 here for Perez. So I'm going with Perez here as well.
Yeah, you guys couldn't have said it any better. I'm also going with Perez, like you said. It's the momentum that carries you forward. And Luke, I like your point that you brought up about Carol versus competition. While it has been harder than what Eileen Perez has seen, she has lost to pretty much everyone inside that realm of competition. So you can't really rate that as a factor in coming into this fight. Had she beaten those girls, I could see this line making sense, but she hasn't, and she's been getting UD'd and finished by all of them. So really, like, while it might seem like a step up in competition for Eileen Perez, at the end of the day, on paper, realistically speaking, it isn't. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, definitely agreed.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Rosa, she does hold the favorite or the favor in the striking department. She should look sharper on the feet, but Perez will hold the advantage in the grappling department. And Rosa has I think it was a 68% takedown defense. So she is pretty damn susceptible to being taken down. And in these 3-round fights, you get taken down in one of those 3 rounds, you're most likely losing the round if you're able to get controlled. So it won't take too much for Eileen Perez to be able to go in there and steal at least 1 round. And then you're just one big moment away in those other 2 rounds from taking it. So, I mean, I'm sort of up in the air, but when I'm up in the air in a chick fight, give me the one at plus money. So I'm going to lean Perez. Next, we'll move on to Zachary Reese versus Asmat Bakoyev. Bakoyev is here making his UFC debut on 5 days' notice, so I'm not too sure what to expect. Haven't been able to watch much tape on the guy at all. But we'll kick it off with you, Luke. Do you think that Bakoyev on his debut can come in here and make a statement against Zachary Reese?
I do. I am going Bakoyev here. Just like you said, I haven't had a lot of research into Bakoyev, but I know he is I think, former LFA champion, and he defended his title. And Zach Reese is no slouch, but I just think when you get a guy, even though, UFC's king by far, I think that championship status, that guy's coming in against a guy, not ranked, a guy he thinks he could beat as a champion of of another organization. And I think, is he plus money here?
The odds aren't out yet. So, that's what I'm kind of curious about. But
if he is plus money, I mean, I don't know if this is a parlay piece, like you said, Zach. Not enough knowledge on these 2 guys. Obviously, know more about Reese, but not enough knowledge on Bakoyev. But I think if it's plus money, this is a great straight play. I'm just kind of riding with the fact that he has 2 title defenses in LFA. A guy with experience. It's not like he's, going through the motions here. This is a champion at some level. So, I'm going with the newcomer 5 days notice here.
Yeah, I got to agree with you guys. Just a few things that I thought, we should mention about this. He is coming out of one of the best MMA gyms on the planet right now, America Top Team. You hear that name, you think Dustin Poirier, you think Bo Nickel, Renato Moicano, you think Pantoja, all these top talent guys. It kind of goes back to your comments about Tagir. You're only as good as, the people that you're training with and the people that are across the gym from you. So, that's just another example of that. Obviously I disagree with you on the first fight, but this one here, I think I'm going to bring your logic over here. I mean, America Top Team is a spectacular MMA gym here in the US. Absolute top prospects coming out of there. And, he's new, he's a newcomer. And, those guys, like we mentioned before, you got a guy like Diego Lopez with his debut. This is something I can see happening with this guy. He's hungry. These guys are always ready. His last fight was back in June last year. So he's had a lot of time to recover. And, those guys that are down in the early prelims and even, just coming on the UFC prelims for their first time, these guys are hungry and they're always ready. Anytime I was in the gym and I knew guys that were, didn't even have a fight lined up, but they're not, big names or anything, trying to make a name for themselves. They were always ready, always in money shape, always on weight. So, I doubt a weight cut's going to be too much into play here. This guy's ready to win. And I think, he's got a chance of doing it in a surprising fashion.
I was hesitant on this one. I was going to lean more towards Zachary Reese. The only thing on what's his face's record that frightens me, Bakoyev's record that frightens me is he has a split decision win against Dylan Buka, who fought in the UFC. He won on Contender Series, went 0-2 in the UFC, getting KO'd by Cesar Almeida and then losing to Prochazka in a UD. So he has fought UFC caliber competition in the past, and for it to be a split decision on a guy that went 0-2, it's not the greatest look in my opinion fighting in the LFA. Zachary Reese notably got slam KO by Cody Brundage in his UFC debut. He went on to beat Julian Marquez by KO. Once again, but what sways me now is Julian Marquez, in my opinion, isn't the greatest fighter, in terms of UFC caliber competition. Neither is the last guy you fought. And then I think you two both just hit, pretty good selling points on taking the guy coming up on short notice who's just hungrier, looking to make a name for himself and ultimately steal the spotlight out from under Zachary Reese here. So, yeah, I guess I'm switching it up and going Bakoyev. Although, like I said, that Dylan Budka fight does have me a little worried.
Yeah, I mean, if this makes you feel any better, I have Bakoyev by KO. I think he'll finish the fight early within the first 2 rounds. I think he's going to get in and get out of there. This guy's starving. He's not even hungry. This guy's fighting with some of the best fighters on the planet. He's just waiting for a shot. And I think he does it in, like I said, very impressive fashion. I think he knocks him out in the first 2 rounds.
Yeah, I also wanted to make a little point on here is that, like, while Bakoyev doesn't have the UFC experience, he does have 21 professional fights, being 18-3. So he's no stranger to being inside the cage. And that, on top of the gym in which he trains at American Top Team, swayed me in Bakoyev's favor. I'm just extremely curious to see what the line comes out at. You would think Zachary Reese would be the favorite. I don't see it being too egregious, but I could see him being probably like a minus 200 favorite. You would just think, being slated to fight and Bakoyev coming in on short notice. But for the story, give me Azmat. And Zachary Reese is a very beatable opponent to make your debut against as well. So, yeah, I'm going Bakoyev. Next up, we have a fun fight here. We have Grant Dawson at minus 280 versus Diego Ferreira at plus 230. Dawson is 22-2-1 while being 1-1-1 in the UFC, opposed to Ferreira, who is 19-5 while being 10-5 in the UFC. Fun matchup here. We have 2 BJJ specialists clashing. All right, we'll kick it off with you, Ryan. Do you think minus 280 is a respectable line here for Dawson, and how do you see this fight going?
Personally, I do not. Bruno Ferreira just had one of the most impressive comeback wins against Mateus Rebecki, at least in the UFC that I've seen. And when you look at, he's 10-5 in the UFC, but you look at some of the guys that he's fought, Beneil Dariush, Gregor Gillespie, Mateusz Gamrot. This is very stacked competition. He went on a 3-fight skid, but when you look at the guys he's fought, very, very hard competition in the rankings, all of them. Some of them, Beneil Dariush and Gamrot, at least Beneil Dariush was at the time, like, on the cusp of fighting for a belt. Mateusz Gamrot's just right there, too, on the cusp of fighting for a belt. So these are championship caliber fighters that he's lost to. Grant Dawson notably got KO'd by King Green. And, there's like a presence and a lack of what Grant Dawson can bring to the feet in a lot of his fights. If he can't get you down, we see it where he can get picked apart on the feet. And Ferreira, very slick scrambler, very hard to take down and keep down. And I think that if he can ride that and scramble, I think he could pick him apart on the feet and ultimately get an underdog upset here to kick off the prelims.
Yeah, I got to disagree with you there, man. Diego's like 40 years old. This dude is about to be on crutches soon, just trying to get out of bed. And, if we're talking about, knockouts here, Diego's last few losses, before that Rebecki comeback, was a decision by Beneil Dariush, who was, this was back in 2021. So he was, in better shape, but still getting to that older side. But before that, he was knocked out by Gillespie and knocked out by Gamrot. Both before, the second round ended. So, if we're counting knockouts against the fighter, I'd argue that Diego's, not able to take as many punches. But, obviously it can always go both ways. But, when you got a 30-year-old Dawson versus a 39-year-old Diego, I have a tough time believing that the 30-year-old is going to lose just because he got knocked out by Green back in whenever the fuck that was. But you know, I have a tough time rooting for a guy that's 40 years old or you know, in my right mind, putting my money down on plus money like that. I think that's a pretty fair line.
Yeah. I honestly was very much, this was probably my main fight that I was up in the air with. I thought the 220 was a little bit wide, but I also thought there was some value there for Diego. But like you said, I actually didn't know he was 39 when I was researching this fight. That is old. And with the similar styles, you know, there's going to be a lot of grappling. Obviously, I think if it stands, Diego has the opportunity to catch him. But what are the odds these guys stand for majority of this fight? Probably pretty low. Like you said, Grant Dawson, you know, younger guy. Also, I think he's 5 out of 6 wins in his last 6 or something like that. So he's riding a huge hot streak and he's beating some, you know, some good names. So I'm going to flip here. I am going to go Grant Dawson. I think, you know, it's cool when you go third, so you guys could, when you have altering opinions, you get to hear, you know, each other's debate. But I think the younger guy here is just the easier play. When you have similar styles and, you know, similar wins under the belt, you're going to go with the guy who's 9 years younger and probably has a better gas tank. So I'm going Grant Dawson here.
Yeah, I'm also going to be on Grant. Yeah, I'm also going to be on Grant Dawson here, but it was a tough one for me, where, I mean, Ferreira has the higher volume output on the feet. So if they were to keep it standing, I think he could probably outpoint Dawson. But Dawson is much more active in his wrestling game. So I think you'll have a lot of opportunities to pick up just little chunks of control time throughout rounds, which I guess it might be kind of up to the judge's discretion how they want to score control time, because that's always a big question mark going into the night. But I could see Dawson controlling a lot of this fight. Like you touched on Ryan Diego's scrambling ability, which he does have, but that's something that I don't necessarily want to put my chips in that basket at 39 years old, because at what point does the cardio start to break? And Dawson averages a very high takedown attempt output, and Diego does have like a 60% takedown defense. I mean, granted, some of those times he can just scramble away, get up, and that shouldn't really factor in much. But I do think Dawson will be able to get the control time, and I think he rides it out to a UD win. Next up, we have another guy making his UFC debut in Billy Elikana versus Bogdan Guskov. Guskov is 16-3 in his career while being 2-1 in the UFC, opposed to Elikana, who is 7-1 in his career, making his UFC debut. Funny thing, I just saw Elikana talking about it, but he's taking his fight on 1 week's notice. And he said he walked into the gym last Friday and all of his teammates were like kind of celebrating. And he was like, what's going on? They're like, yo, dude, like you're getting your UFC shot. So a little funny that his teammates knew before him. I don't know how confident that makes me feel. But Luke, we'll kick it off with you. Do you think Elikana can get this fight done on a week's notice?
I do not. I think you kind of hit it on the head. A guy on a week's notice making his UFC debut is kind of a hard guy to bet on. It's not like the guys we've talked about on this card, you know, prior with Bekov and Carpenter, where they're kind of, you know, names that, you know, are known in the MMA world. I don't know anything about Elikana. When I saw this fight, I think there was a cancellation. I forget who Guskov was supposed to fight. I don't know.
It was Johnny Walker. Yeah, it was Johnny Walker.
Yeah, like, so obviously that was I'm, you know, even though Johnny Walker's very hit or miss, that's a guy you tune in to watch. But I'm going Bogdan here, or Bogdan, just from the experience. I don't know too much about, you know, his opponent here, so I can't put my money there. But excited to hear what you guys say here.
Yeah, we couldn't have said it better myself. I just don't know enough about the guy on the other side of the cage to confidently, you know, bet or pick him to win, which is sad to say. You know, this guy Elikana might be a sick fighter. We just don't know. You know, the world might get introduced to Elikana on Saturday night, but just logically speaking, I got to go with Bogdan Guskov here.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you guys. I think Bogdan takes this one, likely by knockout, is how I see this going down. You know, Bogdan's kind of a knockout artist in that shape. And you know, I just don't see, you know, I don't see Billy as a huge prospect. You know, to me, this kind of seems like you know, they kind of just try to piece somebody together to fight this guy. And you know, even Johnny Walker may have been taking a fall here. You know how he likes to get knocked out by pretty much anybody. You know, if you put Johnny Walker in Billy's spot, you know, I have a tough time putting my money on him as well. So, in my mind, just matchup wise, I see Billy as kind of just a guy they pulled together. Maybe a last minute thing that, was just a guy that popped into mind and they put up in that matchup. And, from the beginning, this is probably a fight that Bogdan was supposed to win, just so, send him up in the rankings. He's 2-1 in the UFC, lost his first, and now he's on a 2-fight win streak. So, I think he's going to make that a three-fight win streak, probably with another knockout here. His last 2 wins have been by knockout. And yeah, I think he keeps that train rolling, and I think Billy's in for a tough night on Saturday.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up where you guys left off. I'm also on Bogdan Guskov in this one. Another thing that I noticed while researching this one a little bit is that on ESPN, they had Billy Elikana listed as a middleweight. So if you're going to tell me this guy's stepping in on a week's notice, fighting a bigger man, and you're going to try to convince me that he's going to win, making his UFC debut nonetheless, and you're going to try to convince me he's going to win, I'm probably going to think you're crazy. So I'm going with Guskov to get him out of there, and I'm also going with the knockout TKO win. Next up, we have Jailton Almeida coming in at -500 versus Sergey Spivak at +350. Almeida is 21-3 while being 7-1 in the UFC, opposed to Spivak, who is 17-4 while being 8-4 in the UFC. San, I'll kick it off to you to talk about your Brazilian brother. Do you think Almeida deserves to be -500?
Yeah. I mean, when you get a guy like that, he's so big, and he's so quick and he's that good on the ground, pause again. It's really tough to bet against him. I mean, his last loss was, did kind of come to a surprise to me. I had him winning that fight. But I don't see it going that same way as it did last time. I think he likely wins by submission here, given that, Spivak does, kind of like to sprawl around on the ground. He's got a few submission wins. And I think, if he even tries it, he's going to be pulled into deep water and he's going to get drowned immediately. I think Jailton's way too strong, and he uses that strength pretty much perfectly when he's in those jiu-jitsu and grappling situations. I have a very, very tough time seeing this fight go any other way. Unless he gets caught, out of nowhere and out of the blue, I really don't see him losing this fight. Now, to speak to the -500, I don't think any UFC fight should ever be -500. I don't think anybody should ever be favored that high. I mean, just think back on Strickland Adesanya. Strickland was like what, +650 underdog. And he just, absolutely put a masterclass on against Adesanya. So you really, I don't think anybody ever deserves to be, above -350 for a fight for that matter. But yeah, no, I think he definitely gets him out of there and very, very likely by sub.
Right, you want to go?
Yeah, I was waiting for you, but yeah, I mean, San, I agree. I pretty much agree with everything you just said, San. Like, Jailton Almeida, besides his last fight against Curtis Blades, where he just unfortunately got caught up against the cage and got hammer-fisted into oblivion, I don't see him doing that again. I think it's when you're a prospect, it's one of those things, you learn on. It's a mistake you make once and you never make again. And Sergey Spivak is a little bit of a step down in competition. I think that Jailton Almeida has his way with him.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is another stepping stone for Almeida to, I think he's one of the top prospects at heavyweight. You could argue he might be the next guy up if, depending on what Cyril Gane does, maybe a couple guys in there. But yeah, I don't see any path to victory here for Spivak. I also tend to not put money on Spivak ever. So I'm going to continue that. I'm going to go Almeida here. I know there's some concern around the MMA community, what Almeida shows up, because sometimes you could, have boring fights. But I don't think that really matters. If you get a dub, you get a dub. And I don't think there's any difference here. I'm going to take him, but I am going to take it by decision.
Yeah, I'm on the decision bandwagon here as well for Almeida. It is kind of weird if you look at both these guys. Like they're like Spivak just looks like a Russian Almeida a little bit. Like they have kind of very similar builds. Styles are kind of similar as well. Even though like Almeida's a little bit more takedown heavy opposed to Spivak, which is a little interesting given that Spivak comes from a Sambo background where Almeida's technically listed as a boxer. Yeah, I don't know how much stake you really want to put into that. But yeah, I see Almeida being able to get Spivak down. I see him being able to hold him down, and it'd only take him holding him down for 2 rounds to squeak out that decision. And I don't even think he'll squeak it out. Like I think he'll win a 30-27 UD. maybe a judge will have it 29-28. But yeah, I'm on Almeida as well.
Dude, I was waiting for you to say. I was waiting for you to say you should hold him down on the ground till he finishes him. I was waiting for that pause to come out.
Yeah, MMA Guru had a clip posted either last night or this morning, and it was like Spivak's not fat or not obese, he's just fat. I'm like, what, dude? Like same thing.
Yeah,
but
he's
a
big homeless guy calling another homeless guy broke. That's what's going on over there. Dude looks like an olive on two fucking toothpicks.
Oh, that's wild. All right, next we'll move on to Peyton Talbot, who's coming in at minus 1,500 versus Reinier Barcelos at plus 750. Talbot, he's looking to build on his 3-0 UFC record. I know we just talked about him in that Prospect of the Year pod that we just did. And he's got a chance here being the featured prelim. It seems like, Dana White's trying to get some more eyes on Talbot here and give an opportunity to showcase his skills and whatnot. So, Luke, I guess we'll kick it off with you. I think, it's going to be 4 of the same thing here. I guess in what fashion do you think Peyton Talbot gets this done?
Yeah, I think he gets it done by knockout. This is one of those fights that you don't really look into because you're just like, they're still giving Peyton Talbot cans. He's probably going to beat them. But like we just talked about, minus 1,500, like who's going to play that? So, I mean, I'm guessing the knockout's going to be like minus 500, I'm assuming. So it might even be, first and second round knockout here for Talbot. But just like we talked about in the last pod, one of the rising stars of the UFC, got a great aura around him. So I'm riding with that, ride the hot streak. He's going to get it done here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think everybody's expecting Talbot to win this one. I do see one avenue for Barcelos to win, and that's in a freak submission. He is a grappler. He's a very good grappler. Obviously, you put him up against guys in the UFC with just grappling. Obviously, he's not, the best grappler. But like I said, I think it would be the only way he wins is in a freak submission and something like that kind of just really comes out of the blue. Maybe Talbot's getting, a little bit too overconfident with his last few wins. He's been kind of getting loose and getting a bit wild in the ring recently. So, that's really the only way I see it. But again, like you guys said, I don't think anybody's expecting Talbot to lose this one.
Yeah, I'll step in here for a quick second before you go, Ryan. The only way I see Talbot losing is if he tears his ACL while walking up into the octagon and he's limping around. I don't know. I just don't see Talbot losing. They're just giving him another opportunity to showcase some cool knockout, some sort of finish, and let him build up his name a little bit more. And then it'll be time for him to start fighting some legitimate competition after this fight.
Yeah, no, like you guys said, I have Talbot clean sweep in this one. I guess the only thing maybe in terms of value, I'll have to see what the line's looking like for Talbot by decision. If there's some plus money in that, I think I'm going to take it just because it seems like when the UFC tries to throw together a guy who they want to get either a spectacular knockout or a slick submission, they never do on those featured prelim bouts. I'm thinking of Mauricio Ruffy, where everyone thought he was going to KO and just beat the shit out of. Well, he did beat the shit out of the guy that he fought, but at the same time, he couldn't find that finish. I think it's just something that you could look at and be like, hey, maybe sprinkle a little bit of money on Peyton Talbot by decision. I don't think the nerves will catch up to him where he's not going for a knockout or not going for a sub, but I don't, and historically speaking, you just see these guys who are given layups, so to speak. And then while they might not fold under pressure and they still put on a great fight, they don't find that outcome that they're looking for, which is either a nice KO or a solid choke.
Yeah. I think it's a good point you made about Ruffy. I remember watching that fight, and granted, I forget who he fought, but that dude had an iron chin. That was just ridiculous. But all right, moving on to the pay-per-view. We have a fun fight here to open up the pay-per-view. We have a toss-up between Kevin Holland at minus 105 versus Reinier de Ridder at minus 115. De Ridder is coming off his UFC debut against Gerald Meerschaert, which was an interesting fight. I think it kind of showed you the level that de Ridder's at, and I'm not saying that in a way to be like, oh, he's on a very high level. But Luke, we'll kick it off with you. Do you think Kevin Holland can take care of Reinier de Ridder and just kind of show the levels to the UFC opposed to one, especially at these weight classes?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit on the head. It really is a toss-up here for me. I think it all depends on what Kevin Holland shows up. He seems to be so hot and cold with these fights. Last fight I think against was Dolidze, right? That was his last fight, which he said he broke a rib and got out, but now he's back in 2 or 3 months fighting again. So I think it really depends on what Holland shows up. If we see the Holland of old where he's going in, he's trying to run and make a run at, something in the UFC, then he gets this victory pretty easily. But like you said, de Ridder's great on the ground. I could see him taking him down and kind of controlling this fight. Holland's no slouch on the ground either. But I could see if he's a little more serious about this and, really serious about making a run in the UFC, I could see him having a better game plan, better mindset going in here and getting the dub as well. This one's hard for me. It really is, because Holland's my boy, but I feel like every other fight you bet on him, he loses. I think if we're picking right now, if I'm putting all my parlays in, all my picks in right now, I'm going to go Holland here. But I got to watch the embeddeds. I gotta get a vibe from Holland to see what kind of guy's showing up on Saturday. But I would love to see Holland get a win here.
Yeah, Luke, I agree with you. I think Holland's seen this one out. Gerald Meerschaert, that fight that de Ridder had with Gerald Meerschaert, I don't think for the prospect that de Ridder is coming in as, two-weight class champ over at 1. I don't think that fight should have been as close as it was. And seeing Ridder squeak that one out, eventually did find the sub in round 3, but it also looked like he was like knocking on death's doorstep after he got that win. I just don't think if you're a guy that's highly touted like that aging Gerald Meerschaert should be that hard of a fight for you. And I think Kevin Holland's seen the better of the competition and has won against the better of the competition. But like you said, to your point, you never know which version of Kevin Holland you're going to get. Is it going to be the one that seems to just give up after round 2 when he feels like he's losing, or is it going to be the guy that can pull off a nasty KO or a nasty submission off his back, and actually fight? Up in the air for me here. I like the line just because Kevin Holland's hit or miss, and de Ridder still has to prove himself. So should be a fun one. I have Kevin Holland sneaking this one out.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go ahead and disagree with you guys here. I do think de Ridder is going to win this fight. I don't think you guys are giving Meerschaert the credit that he deserves. That dude is a beast. He can take a lot of shots. He landed a lot of shots. And I'd argue one of his better performances, even though he did lose, while they were on the feet, while they were standing up, he did hit a lot of very important shots, a lot of significant strikes. Maybe not in volume, but definitely in power. And de Ridder was definitely feeling him. I think if you put Meerschaert and Holland in the cage, for example, it's not that clear cut that Holland takes it away. I think he does win that fight, but you can't just count out Meerschaert like that. He's a hell of a competitor, and he's a really strong guy. So not only that, but Zach, I know we touched on this a little bit off camera. De Ridder just gives me Duplessis vibes. He's kind of a guy that, you're sitting on your couch, you're looking at him, you compare him to the other fighters that have gone on, and you're kind of like, this guy looks goofy. He looks weird. It doesn't look like he knows what he's doing. But that's just kind of that awkward style, that him and DDP both bring to the octagon. I think, it's a guy that when you look at in film, he seems easy. But when you get in the cage, you just don't know where to go first. De Ridder has very long reach. Kevin Holland can get crazy sometimes. He can, kind of jump around and make himself vulnerable to a lot of those big shots and a lot of those opportunities that I think a guy like de Ridder can, really capitalize on. I could see Kevin Holland getting put out again by submission. I think just de Ridder has a lot more avenues, clear-cut avenues to winning as opposed to Kevin Holland. Where Kevin Holland, I see him, a few situations here. If he comes on his A game, like you guys are talking about, if he really, comes out as that Kevin Holland competitor that, we've seen in the past few years, but not as consistently as we have liked, then yeah, definitely. I can see Kevin Holland winning this. But, in general, all in all, I think de Ridder's got this one. Being a two-weight class champ, a double champ in any division and in any fighting league and fighting promotion is not to be taken lightly. And I think Meerschaert's maybe getting a little bit disrespected here. I think he's a hell of a competitor, and he put up as good of a fight as you can against a guy like de Ridder. And I'm excited to see de Ridder, a more confident de Ridder coming into this fight on Saturday against a guy like Kevin Holland, who really is a gatekeeper nowadays. When I think Kevin Holland, I think Neil Magny, that type of guy who he's not really going to move up and down the rankings too much. And I think even Dana White said it. Kevin Holland is a gatekeeper at this point for the rankings. And to me, they wouldn't have brought up de Ridder and given him in this fight this early if I didn't think he could take it. I got de Ridder.
What better of a matchup could you make for Reinier de Ridder? Because you have everyone saying, like, all right, is this guy any good? After that Mearshart fight, like, what's the deal here? You come in as a 2-division champ from 1. You have a lot of, I want to say a crazy amount of hype, because I don't think, your general fan really knew much about him, but you had a lot of hype around the guy, and Kevin Holland's the guy who can shut that hype down. But I do see de Ridder having more avenues to victory, like you touched on, Son. Kevin Holland does get taken down. Reinier de Ridder loves to be on the ground. Reinier de Ridder also has a very high takedown output. So I see him going in there and shooting up probably 25 takedowns that fight. I think he averages like 6 or 7 per 5 rounds. So he's probably going to go out there and shoot 15 takedowns. And I do see him getting Kevin Holland down, especially since Kevin Holland is very comfortable on his back. But I just don't see Kevin Holland necessarily finding the sub. I will say this fight kind of does scream split decision to me. I know it's like impossible to call a split decision because who are the judges? What are they going to do? But it screams split decision, and I see de Ridder having the advantage in the control time. So I'll lean de Ridder on this one. Moving on to the next fight of the pay-per-view, another fun one here. We have Beneil Dariush at +140 against Renato Moicano at -170. Dariush being 22-6-1. While being 16-6-1 in the UFC, opposed to Moicano with a record of 25-1 while being 12-5 in the UFC. Son, we'll kick it off with you. The money man is back. Do you think he rides the momentum here?
Hey, you guys heard me talking about him earlier. I was already excited about the Dan Hooker or potential Dan Hooker or Gaethje matchup after that fight. And honestly, I really think that's where Moicano's going. Maybe I'm a little bit overzealous, overlooking this fight a little bit. Beneil Dariush his last few fights, he's just been getting finished. And I think the UFC is getting ready to kind of start knocking him down those rankings and eventually get him off the show. He is older. Moicano is also not a young guy by any means, but, like he likes to say, he cannot afford to lose. He's here to make money, and Dariush is one of the big stepping stones that he has to get through. And honestly, if he keeps this up, the way he's been fighting, the fight Moicano put up against BSD, super impressive. And Saint Denis is no bum, by any means necessary. By any means, like he's a dog. He's a really good fighter, especially at that weight class. He's not a weight bully. He fits that weight class very well. He's a healthy. What fucking weight class is that? Was it
lightweight?
Yeah, lightweight. Yeah, he's a healthy lightweight. But I just I see Moicano winning this fight, and getting Beneil out of there to potentially set up that Dan Hooker fight coming up.
Yeah, Son, I agree with you. I like to look at both guys are 35 years old, so definitely up there in age. But the activity of Moicano, he fought 3 times last year. While Beneil Dariush has been off for a year and probably 2 months now, just about 2 months. So when you age, I'm not saying you should be taking every fight given to you, but you like to see at least 2 fights a year. These long year layoffs. Beneil Dariush is dealing with some injuries, so you're coming up against the guy who's just riding once again all the momentum in the world, which is Renato Moicano. And I see Moicano just being the fresher fighter. He's been more active, has more minutes now, and just carrying his momentum to potentially get either a title eliminator or maybe even a title shot, depending on how the cards fall later this year.
Yeah, I'm right with you guys. I think it's a clear case of one guy going up and another going down. No disrespect to Dariush. He's put on a show for a lot of years in the UFC. But I don't know. You see him walk in with the gray hair and the 2 losses recently. It's kind of hard to put your money on that fighter. And with Moicano, obviously we've talked about him. He's one of the rising stars in that division. Potential title candidate. But I think every time we watch him fight, he just looks that much better. He looked great against Turner, and then he comes out and is against who did he fight last?
Saint Denis.
Saint Denis, and dominated that fight. Obviously, doctor stoppage, but he was dominating that fight. In the Turner fight, he gets cracked, comes back, dominates the rest of that fight. And it's the exact opposite case for Dariush. He got completely pieced up by Charles. And I think he kind of realized that fight, it was just like, all right, there's a clear level to the top 6 guys and everyone else below in the lightweight division. I think Moicano is, in that top 6 level. I think he gets this one done, and I think he makes it look rather easily. And, just like we talked about before, gets the pick of the litter between Dan Hooker and Justin Gaethje later on this year for a title eliminator.
Yeah, I think I thought it was, sorry, Tom, but I thought it was hilarious that, Ryan, you brought up that they're the same age. You just look at the two guys, not only the gray hairs, but just how he's walking around. He's kind of limping. He's slower. He's visually slower. This dude, in my eyes, Dariush is 35 fighting like a 40-year-old. And then you get a Moicano who's going exactly the opposite direction. He's a 35-year-old fighting like a 29, 30-year-old that's really just now getting into his prime. It's like we touched on, he's more active and he looks better physically. I think he's more capable physically. That's what it's going to boil down to for me.
Yeah, I think we sound the horns. I think Renato Moicano minus 170 is a parlay piece. I love those odds. Like we touched on, big believer in momentum. One guy going up, the other guy going down. And on top of that, Dariush should not be able to go in there and wrestle fuck Moicano. And Moicano should beat him up with his hands. And yeah, I see Moicano finding a KO, TKO finish in this one.
Yeah.
Moving on, we have Jiří Procházka at plus 100 versus Jamahal at minus 120. Another toss-up here. The two former champs are colliding in what seems to be more than just a title eliminator, because the loser of this one, I don't really see having an opportunity to touch the title anytime soon. So, Ryan, we'll kick this one off with you. Which one of the former champs are you riding with?
Dude, I mean, I'm so split on this. I mean, both guys beat Glover Teixeira for their belt, who was 40 at the time. So you really can't take, was in his 40s at the time. So it's like, can't take that. And I think ultimately for me, what this comes down to is Jiří Procházka's defense or lack thereof. You've seen it in pretty much all of his fights where he likes to block punches with his head. He'll dip his head down for body shots. He did it against Pereira, did it in his debut. And I think a guy that carries the power of Jamahal will, if you do that and you have your game plan where it's like, I'm going to duck and weave and follow your hands with my head as a way of playing defense, especially with the vicious KO he just took to Pereira, I think Jamahal will find a knockout in this one, potentially late second, third round KO. I don't rate either guy too highly. Jamahal, not that he's a bad fighter, he just annoys me. So just just like the way he comes off, the way he presents himself, it annoys me, unfortunately. But I do think Jamahal will squeak this one out and get a win.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree with you more. Especially with Yair deciding, that he's going to use his face as a shield every other fight. I think he's taking a lot more damage. He has had those 2 fights with Alex. Both got him put out. He's not. I think at this point his brain's probably mush. But speaking of Alex Pereira, I think Jamah's and Yuri's greatness kind of got overshadowed by how untouchable Alex Pereira seems to be. He's just so elite, so good. He can make you miss punches and knock you out right with the counter punch immediately. It does not take more than one punch, and sometimes this guy even whiffs and looks like he knocks people out. I think we shouldn't look over the fact of how skilled both of these guys really are. And I don't think it could be a more evenly matched fight as far as what each one is capable of, and that both of them could easily, finish this fight at any moment. But I definitely, despite his blunders online and his personality, that, I think Jamahal wins this one. He's one of my favorite fighters, Michigan boy, in the last few years. And then really that last Alex fight kind of really ruined his reputation. But I think it's really going to come down to, the training that they're putting in. I think Jiří puts in a lot of, symbolic, a lot of, weird Aaron Rodgers type of training. And Jamahal is out there, really getting the technical shit down. He's banging over here and out here in Michigan, all over the United States. This dude, he trains super hard, and he's as legit as it comes striking wise. My opinion's in that division, second only to Alex Pereira.
Yeah, I very little to add. I'm riding with you guys. I'm on Jamahal Hill. I think you guys said it the best with just Yuri's defense. Like, he will defend body shots with his head, which he might be the only fighter on the roster that does that. I think he relies a lot on his toughness to get through a lot of fights. We saw it with the Rakic fight, who had him probably beat in that first round and just couldn't withstand the toughness of Yuri. But like you guys said, Jamahal Hill's on another level. I think it's very clear that if it wasn't for Alex Pereira, Jamahal Hill, arguably, maybe Magomed would be in there, but I think Jamahal Hill would have the belt currently. I think he's the second best fighter in that division. Like you guys said, he kind of has gone a little crazy online trying to, get retribution for that Alex fight and convince, the fans and the UFC that he deserves a rematch. And this is the way to do it. You win this fight, you get a shot at the title. I think he's just more technical. I do think he has a little bit more power in his hands. But like Yuri has a path to victory. If he does, that toughness does provide the opportunity to knock him out, but I don't see it happening. I got Jamahal here. I hope Jamahal, one thing I really want to hit on is I hope Jamahal utilizes his whole game. I know we really don't see a lot of leg kicks by Jamahal Hill. I think that's a huge spot. He could really damage the legs and slow down this fight and open up an opportunity for a knockout here. I don't think he takes it. But I would love to see him grow in his game and, get a little more aspects in his game where he does show that off. So I'm taking Jamahal Hill, but one thing I want to say is there is absolutely no shot this fight goes the distance. I wouldn't be surprised if under 2.5 rounds is like minus 200. So I will definitely be slamming that as well. So I'm taking Jamahal Hill, and I'm definitely taking this fight, within the distance.
Yeah, I like this fight ending within the distance too, because neither of these guys really have great defense on their feet. You would say Jamahal holds the advantage just because, like you guys touched on, it seems like Yuri's almost trying to get hit in the head. But if you're going to sit there and bang it out, and both guys are vulnerable, I mean, it won't go the distance, but I do see Jamahal Hill. I do trust his chin a little bit more. I mean, he hasn't fought since April, where Yuri got knocked out by Alex. What was that? Probably 4 months ago, maybe. I forget exactly when that fight took place, but it was probably 4 or so months ago. And that was, I mean, he was out at the end of the first round, it seemed like, and then you come back, take another shot. So I trust the chin of Jamahal Hill more. Jamahal Hill probably holds the power advantage, but Jamahal Hill does leave himself susceptible, but I'm also on Hill here, finding a finish. Next, we'll kick it off to the co-main. We have Merab Dvalishvili at plus 250, opposed to Umar Nurmagomedov at minus 320. Merab is 18-4 while being 11-2 in the UFC, while Umar is 18-0 while being a perfect 6-0 in the UFC. This is another fun matchup. Luke, we'll kick it off with you here. Are you on Umar Nurmagomedov to come in and take Merab's belt?
Yeah, I am. I think really it just speaks measures to me. Obviously, Merab's great. A lot of respect for both these guys. Probably the best gas tank currently on the roster Merab has. And the takedowns are going to be there. He's going to get some. I just don't think he keeps them down. And I think that Sandhagen Umar fight was a great indicator of the levels to this game. I'm a huge Sandhagen fan. I think he's a very well-rounded fighter, great at every aspect of the game. And Umar, dominated that fight, got a UD there. And I think that's just levels to it. I don't even know if I would take Merab over Corey at this point. But I don't think there's really any holes in Umar's game. I think we see the levels. We saw Khabib, great at the takedowns, kind of limited the striking. Then you get Islam, who's, really good at both. But I think Merab might be the best overall striker out of that camp right now. He's so technical on the feet, and the fact that he outpoint fought Corey Sandhagen really has me heavily in his favor. I'm going to take Umar here. I think he gets it done. I don't know how, but I do think it doesn't last 5 rounds. I don't think these guys like each other at all, and I could see one of these guys, overextending and getting knocked out. And I think Umar is going to be the guy with his hand raised at the end of the day.
Yeah, Luke, I do agree with you. I think in terms of ground, like wrestling ground, the ground game goes, I think Merab's going to go, he's going to shoot, another 50 takedowns. He might get him down a few times, but Umar's going to get right back up, and the same goes both ways. Both these guys are pretty hard to hold down. I think so. It'll just essentially come down to a striking bout. And when you look at the strikers, you look at the numbers, Umar Nurmagomedov is the better striker of the two. So I think he's just going to have a fun night. In terms of knockout, I don't know. I can't see this one going. I can see this one going all the way, but I do see a pretty dominant, maybe 3-2, 4-1 win out of Umar. I don't know what Merab really brings in terms of the striking aspect. He's been cracked by Henry Cejudo. He's been cracked by Marlon Moraes. He leaves himself and his chin very open, especially in the beginning of fights. So potentially there is some potential there for Umar to just catch him first or second round. But still, to that said, I think there's just more paths to victory for Umar Nurmagomedov than there is for Merab.
Yeah, Luke and Ryan, I definitely agree with you guys. But more importantly, I do like that you brought up the Corey Sandhagen aspect of it. I think Corey Sandhagen is one of those guys that's kind of overlooked. He doesn't look like the dog that he is, and it may not show. He's not always in these contender fights, but he's really on top of his game. He's a great fighter, great striker, great grappler. He can really do it all. He's one of those all-rounded guys. Umar, that fight, I did bet on Sandhagen that fight, but Umar really turned my head that fight. A decision is kind of not what I expected out of that fight. I thought Sandhagen was going to put him out, or get Umar out of there. Kind of that was the heat check I thought for him. But I think Umar is blazing hot right now. And when you put him up against a guy like Merab is really pushing the pace. He's really hoping that the stamina is going to get worn down. He's hoping that one of his takedowns is going to get through. He's going to try 20 takedowns, and if three of those work, you're going to get held down those 3 times with no help. But surprisingly, in my hot take for this fight, I do think Umar wins, but I don't think it's in a super exciting or crazy fashion. I think it goes, unanimous decision, but I think this could be a pretty boring fight. I think what it's going to come down to is, the first few rounds are going to really be playing around with each other, just touching hands, making sure that, they're kind of heat checking each other throughout the first few rounds. And then when those takedowns come into play, Merab's got really good takedowns and really good takedown defense. Same thing for Umar. He's wrestling with the best wrestlers in the world. I really think that part of their game is really going to cancel each other out. But not in the way that forces them to strike. I think Umar will probably put more pressure in the striking realm to Merab than Merab will bring. But I think it's going to be an otherwise pretty boring fight. Surprisingly, given that, these names are big names and these are huge contenders and really good fighters. But I think, a majority of it's just going to be a grappling match with these guys, one of them trying to be a better wrestler. And, it's probably just not going to go down that way. It'll probably just be a barely, if not even a split decision for Umar.
I will say, when I watch these guys fight, I actually enjoy watching them both fight because Merab is just constant pace, constant pressure, constant movement. Striking might not look beautiful, but he always has output. And Umar is just so stylistically good no matter where it goes. On his feet, he has some very good exchanges. He's able to counter. And what I think Umar's probably biggest or greatest ability will be in this fight is his scrambling ability for when Merab does get deep in on his takedowns, which, if he's taking 20, 25, 30, 35 takedown attempts, which wouldn't shock me at all. It could even be north of that. He will eventually get deep in on some takedowns, but we saw Umar's scrambling ability in that fight with Corey Sandhagen, and it was just next to none. So I think there will be some fun grappling exchanges. I don't think Merab will be able to hold Umar down once he gets him down because, over the course of 5 rounds, he probably will. And it just comes down to whether or not Merab's gas, and not even his gas tank, but if his pressure can outpoint Umar's damage dealt, which if damage is the highest scoring criteria, then I don't see any way in which Merab deals more damage than Umar in this fight. So I think Umar gets the job done here. I could see him finding Merab's chin, getting him out of there. But it's one of those weird things where, like, when Merab did experience, when he did get hurt, it's kind of when you don't expect it. You'd think like a striker like Sean O'Malley would be able to hurt him if Henry Cejudo did, but it's just kind of how the game plan works out, So if Merab's sitting there not necessarily expecting Umar to go in and strike to that level, I do think Umar will find his chin and get him out of there. If not, I think he gets him. I think he pulls off like a 49-46 UD, somewhere in that realm.
Yeah, Zach, to piggyback off that, and before we move on to the main event, I saw a clip on Twitter. I forget who posted it, but it was, if you guys remember, O'Malley hit Merab late with a body shot in the 5th round of their title fight, and Merab felt it. Obviously, it's 20 takedowns in, 20 minutes in or so. But I saw a tweet, and it was like, you best believe like Khabib in that corner with those great minds of MMA in that corner are gonna, try to capitalize off of that. So my biggest thing why I mentioned, I don't think it goes the distance. I could very much see Umar taking that and, maybe landing a couple teeps, some rib shots, some kidney shots on the ground, and really beating up that body and having that potential getting it out of there. I do think it's highest probability that it goes the distance, but I just wanted that kind of influenced my don't go the distance decision, because I do definitely think Merab has some vulnerability, in his midsection.
Yeah, if he's able to beat up his body too, and Merab's visibly showing it, I mean, that will slow down the wrestling game as well, and that'll just open up more opportunities for something to come in over top and find his chin at some point as well. So that was a good point you touched on. And now on to the main event. We have the pound for pound number 1 Islam Makhachev coming in at -400 versus Arman Tsarukyan at +300. Islam being 26-1 in his career while being 15-1 in the UFC, opposed to Arman, who was 22-3 while being 9-2 in the UFC. -400 seems like a little bit of a steep line given their first fight, but I personally do not have too much of a problem with it, just given that Islam is now the pound for pound number 1. He has all the momentum in the world. Luke, you touched on when you're the champ, you get that little boost in a video game. And like you touched on in our last pod, Islam has that right now. And I am also expecting to see a larger progression from their last fight in Islam opposed to Arman. As crazy as that sounds, given that it was Arman's UFC debut at like 22 years old. But personally, I'm expecting Islam to go out there, rack up control time. In their first fight, you could see Islam had a lot of success when he got Arman up against the cage. He just pretty much held him there at will and did what he wanted with him there. So I think that's a position that Islam will be able to capitalize off of in this fight here. And I see Islam outstriking his way to a UD. Probably, I think a pretty dominant one, maybe 4 rounds to 1. Ryan, I'll let you take the floor from here. What do you think about this fight?
No, Zach, I think you hit the nail on the head. I do agree with you. And while I think people forget how young Arman still is, only 28. Obviously, both guys since they last fought have improved tremendously in their game. I just think Islam squeaked it out a little bit more. You see it every fight, better in striking. Wrestling's always there. Islam always just seems to improve and just gain a new level every time he steps into the octagon. Needless to say, Arman does as well, but still open on the feet. He fought, probably 2 or 3 fights ago, he fought someone. I'm blanking on the name, but the guy was able to catch him on the feet in the open, rock him a little bit. He did eventually find like a TKO ground and pound win, but it came at a cost. And I think if you're going to stand there and bang with the 2 strikers, Arman definitely presents himself. His chin's open, and I think Islam will be targeting that. Needless, I don't know if this will go to a decision. If it does, I don't think Arman's going to squeak out a sketchy one against Islam either. So give me Islam.
Yeah, I could go next. I think you guys hit it. I did rewatch that fight, their first fight not too long ago, and it was a great matchup. But I think just the levels, both these men have jumped levels in, not only in competition but in their skill set. But I think Islam has just gained so much more, advantages in every aspect of his game. He looks great in the feet, like we said. He, arguably, or I guess not arguably, outstruck DP, which is a huge feat. And I know we always talk about MMA math doesn't add up, but I think you just look at what both these men did in Charles Oliveira, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, submission artist the UFC has ever seen. And Islam kind of raw, like tossed him around really and got that sub. And then you go against Arman in that 3-round fight. And when the judge is watching it live and money on Charles, I thought Charles won that fight. Watching it back, I see why they gave it to Arman. But I don't know, man. I just think there's just levels to this game. And like you said, the video game boost. I can't see, Islam losing this one. I think there will be a day where someone takes Islam's belt, but it's not going to be Saturday. But I will say Arman's going to, like you guys said, he's 28 years old. He's going to be around for a while. He will hoist that belt up sometime in the future. It's just not going to be Saturday.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you guys, especially on the point that, Tsarukyan's going to come back for that belt. And I wouldn't be surprised if Tsarukyan takes that belt from Islam, just not this weekend. You look at their last few fights, of course, MMA math doesn't work with the Dustin Poirier fight, but just Islam, showing what he's capable of on the feet, which is something that, nobody really expected. Everybody knew that he was decent on the feet. He had good striking, but, you think of Islam Makhachev and you think this guy is a pure wrestler. That is not the case. He can stand and bang with pretty much anybody, as they've shown. I think really the biggest hole in Arman's game right now, as we saw in the last Charles Oliveira fight, was he can get caught at any moment. And, you know, he almost got subbed 2 or 3 times that last fight with Charles. And, you know, obviously Charles is like you guys said, one of the best, if not the best, submission artists in the game, and if not all time. And you know, you can't, you know, set aside his skills because he almost, you know, submitted Islam as well. But, you know, when it comes down to it, I think if you put Islam in Charles's feet, in Charles's shoes, you know, if you give him one opportunity to finish and to submit and to choke out Arman, he's going to take it, even if that means ripping his chin off, you know, pulling a Khamzat Chimaev on Whitaker here. I don't think there's really anything that's going to stop him from, you know, putting his bicep through this dude's throat. So, yeah, if the opportunity is there, I think there's a close to 0 chance that Islam doesn't capitalize on it, especially with his grappling. And I think ultimately, you know, his striking is really going to put Islam's striking is going to put Tsarukyan in a position where, you know, they kind of have to grapple. And from that point on, it's just downhill for Arman.
Yeah, I agree. Let me actually go back on my prediction, though. I was saying UD. I actually am going to go with Islam via Darce choke. We saw Charles almost land that Darce choke on Arman, and Islam has come out and said he's like, the Darce is my favorite choke. If I get that thing anywhere near locked up, they're done. So if Arman does feel the need to grapple in this fight, if he's down 3 rounds and it's in the 4th or 5th, and Islam has him in trouble on his feet, I could see Arman trying to go in and just scramble for a takedown and put himself in a position of vulnerability. And I could see Islam locking up a Darce there. So I'm going Islam Darce choke, and I will clip this and put on our Instagram after he submits him via Darce.
You're gonna have to find a book that takes that. I think ESPN might do by exact method, but
that'd be pretty crazy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, in that case, I think that's about it for the night. We're gonna give out a sheet of picks this week. We'll put those together for you guys soon. But yeah, thank you all for listening, and hope you guys enjoy this card.